The Rose Inn by K. Brad Barfield. My first morning in Crossett began with an argument between a rooster and a textbook. At 3:15 in the morning, General Beauregard crowed with a voice that rattled window panes. A teacher on the third floor of the Rose Inn responded by slamming a heavy book against the floorboards. The rooster crowed again. Another book fell. Thus was Crossett awakened, not by clock or whistle, but by poultry and pedagogy. The Rose Inn was no ordinary boarding house. It was Crossett's declaration that it was not a rough-and-tumble camp, but a proper town. The building stood brick and proud on Main Street, rebuilt after fire, its polished floors creaking with authority. The lobby smelled of lemon oil and pipe smoke. Photographs of massive pine logs hung on the walls, each suspiciously similar, though captioned as different champions from 1907, 1909, and 1911. At the center of the lobby sat a checkerboard, carved into a cypress knee, bottle taps standing in for kings. Men bent over it in silence as salesmen passed through with suitcases heavy enough to cause injury. The teachers upstairs carried the air of professors, but their curriculum was enforced with piano scales and late-night percussion. One evening I tried to pass a teacher in the hallway. She stopped me with a chalk-dusted hand. If Train A leaves Crossett with 12 cords of pulpwood and Train B leaves Monticello with 16, when do they meet? I confessed ignorance of Train B's intentions. She declared me unfit for promotion. At 9 o'clock sharp, another teacher played the piano until a discordant chord rang through the walls. At 10, Beauregard crowed as though applauding. At 11, a third teacher hurled a book at the ceiling and plaster dust floated down on guests in the lobby. Salesmen flinched but carried on, accustomed to algebra by bombardment. When Cap Gates himself gave me my first tour of Main Street, he wore a dark suit in heat better suited for linen and tapped his cane against every crack in the sidewalk. He pointed out each building as if explaining the diagram of a machine. Rose Inn here, bank next door. Masonic Lodge after that. It doubles as a post office when Washington forgets us. Mercantile across the street, Mills at the far end. One line, like lumber through a planer. I asked about Beauregard. Cap grinned. Picked him up on the courthouse steps in Hamburg. Judge was fixing to serve him a writ. I figured Crossett needed a mascot. Turns out he keeps better time than most men. It was a bold claim, since Beauregard's timing was wrong by hours. Yet Cap's confidence was contagious. When the rooster crowed at 5 in the evening, Crossett adjusted supper accordingly. When he crowed during Sunday service, the preacher raised his voice. When it crowed at midnight, children were told to go back to bed and mind their lessons. Crossett had learned to obey error with discipline. That evening, I stood at the window of my second-floor room. Below, cows returned from the pastures, grazing on the courthouse lawn as naturally as they had been issued grazing permits. A boy offered to rent me one for a nickel, swearing she would serve as a reliable guard. "She'll follow you everywhere," he promised. I declined, but noted the efficiency of livestock as security systems. Inside the Mercantile, I ordered lemonade, only to gag on a flavor more akin to turpentine than sugar. The waitress shrugged. "Sugar's just sour this week." A man at the counter leaned over. "Don't worry, son. That's Crossett lemonade. Puts hair on your slide rule." For days afterwards, strangers offered me refills, always with a wink. Evenings in the Rose Inn lobby became Crossett's true parliament. Old men whittled pine knots and told stories that stretched lumber into legend. One swore the log pine behind the mill was bottomless, connected to the Gulf of Mexico. Another insisted the Rose Inn was haunted by a preacher who vanished, leaving only a suitcase of hymnals. A salesman whispered that Cap Gates had a glass eye made of crosset glass. An older man contradicted him, swearing that Cap was simply blind in one eye and couldn't half see out of the other. Both tales were accepted as true. I wrote to my sister that week. Crosset is governed by two clocks, the whistle and General Beauregard. The whistle keeps order. The rooster tells the truth, even when wrong. Cap Gates talks in bazillions. The teachers drop algebra from the ceiling. Cows graze on Main Street like aldermen, and the mercantile serves lemonade laced with myth. The Rose Inn is no hotel. It is Parliament, theater, and classroom. Crosset runs not on timber alone, but on story, error, and laughter. Somehow, it works. At 10 p.m., Beauregard crowed, the piano struck a final discord, and a book thud from the third floor. Incorrect, but entirely Crosset.